Get that woman out of my court from now!
Your Honor, I am simply observing.
Did I ask you to speak? Did I ask you? Sit down. Before I have you dragged out.
The law does not require your permission to be spoken, Your Honor.
His gavel cracked like a gunshot.
Bailiff, cuff her. 1 night in a cell.
The black woman didn't flinch. She held out her wrists, steady, still. The bailiff locked the cuffs. The courtroom watched. No one said a word. She was booked, fingerprinted, and thrown into a holding cell overnight. All because she dared to speak in a courtroom that belonged to Judge Harold Whitfield. But this judge had just made the worst mistake of his 30-year career. He just didn't know it yet. Unbelievable! But here's the thing. This woman, she wasn't always powerful. Let me take you back to the beginning. Olivia Turner grew up in a place where courthouses meant trouble. She was raised in Cypress Row, a neighborhood on the south side of Birmingham, where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights worked when they felt like it. Her mother, Ruth, cleaned offices for a living. 3 jobs, 6 days a week, hands rough from bleach and cold water. Ruth Turner never finished high school, but she could quote scripture from memory, and she never let her daughter leave the house without pressed clothes and a straight spine. "You walk in like you belong," Ruth used to say, "even when they tell you that you don't." Olivia listened. She was the only black girl in her honors classes at Jefferson High. The teachers mispronounced her last name for 4 years. She corrected them every single time. She graduated valedictorian. The principal shook her hand at the ceremony like he was doing her a favor. She went to law school on a full scholarship, the University of Virginia. She was one of 3 black students in her class. The others dropped out by second year. Olivia stayed. She studied in the library until it closed, then studied in her car with a flashlight. She graduated top 5. 3 firms offered her positions before she'd even passed the bar. She turned them all down. Instead, she went home. Back to Birmingham. Back to the people who couldn't afford lawyers, who got bulldozed by a system that treated them like line items on a docket. She opened a 1-room office above a barber shop on 4th Street and took cases nobody else wanted. Wrongful evictions, racial profiling lawsuits, families torn apart by a bail system that punished poverty. She won more than she lost, and every win meant something, because her clients were people who had never won anything before. 25 years she did this. 25 years of walking into courtrooms where judges looked at her skin before they looked at her credentials. 25 years of being asked if she was the defendant, of being told to sit in the gallery when she belonged at the counsel table, of watching white attorneys with half her record get twice her respect. She never complained. She just kept winning. And then, 6 months ago, something happened that nobody in the Alabama legal establishment saw coming. Olivia Turner was elected head of the State Bar Association. First black woman. Ever. The vote wasn't close. She won by the widest margin in the organization's 140-year history. 300 attorneys wrote letters of support. The governor called personally to congratulate her. But Olivia didn't change. She didn't move to a corner office downtown. She didn't hire a driver or start wearing designer suits. She kept her same apartment, same car, same plain blazer she'd worn to 100 courtrooms before. Because Olivia believed something that most people in power forgot the moment they got it. The system only works when someone watches it from the inside. So she started visiting courthouses. Unannounced, no entourage, no cameras. She'd drive to small counties across the state, sign in as a court observer, sit in the back row, and watch. She watched how judges treated defendants. She watched how public defenders were given 3 minutes to argue cases that deserved 3 hours. She watched who got mercy and who got the maximum. And she took notes. Most judges never knew she'd been there until they received a formal review letter 3 weeks later. Some changed their behavior. Some didn't. Today, she was visiting Ridgemont County. Ridgemont was a small courthouse in a small town 2 hours north of Birmingham. Population 12,000. 1 judge, 1 prosecutor, a public defender who handled 60 cases a month and looked like he hadn't slept since last year. The courthouse had been flagged 11 times in the past 3 years. Complaints about excessive sentencing. Complaints about racial bias. Complaints about a judge who ran his courtroom like a personal kingdom. Judge Harold Whitfield. Olivia had read his file on the drive up. 30 years on the bench, exposed to exactly 0 consequences. Every complaint filed against him had been dismissed, deferred, or buried. The man had never been reviewed, never been challenged, never been told no. She parked her 10-year-old Honda in the gravel lot outside the courthouse. She looked at the building. Faded brick, Confederate memorial by the front steps, American flag hanging limp in the heat. She picked up her briefcase, locked her car, and walked in alone. Just another court observer. Nobody special. That's exactly what she wanted them to think. The Ridgemont County Courthouse smelled like old wood and older money. Olivia signed the visitor log at the front desk. Name, time, purpose of visit. She wrote, Court Observer, in neat block letters. The clerk, a white woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, looked at her over the counter. Observer, the clerk said. For which case? General Session, Olivia said. I'm just watching today. The clerk's eyes lingered a beat too long. Then she slid the log back and pointed toward the double doors. Courtrooms down the hall. Don't sit in the first 2 rows. Those are for attorneys. Olivia thanked her and walked through. The courtroom was small. Wood-paneled walls, drop ceiling with water stains, an American flag in the corner, leaning slightly to the left like it had given up. The gallery had 8 rows of wooden pews, half of them empty. The ones that were occupied held a familiar pattern. Black and brown faces on the defendant's side, white faces behind the prosecution. Olivia took a seat in the 5th row. She set her briefcase on the floor, folded her hands, and waited. At 9:15, the side door opened. Judge Harold Whitfield walked in like he owned the building. And in Ridgemont, he basically did. He was 63 years old, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck, and a face that had been red for so long it had become its permanent color. His robe was pressed. His hair was combed back in silver waves. He wore a gold class ring on his right hand that he tapped against the bench when he was irritated, which was often. He sat down without looking at the gallery. The bailiff called the room to order. Whitfield didn't wait for the noise to settle before he started talking. First case, he said. Holloway. A young black woman stood up from the front row. Denise Holloway, 26 years old, single mother. She wore a dress that was clean but not new, and her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep still. Her public defender, a thin white man named Garrett, who looked like he'd slept in his suit, stood beside her and opened a folder he'd clearly read for the first time 5 minutes ago. The case was simple. Denise owed $200 in back rent. Her landlord wanted eviction. Denise had proof of a partial payment and a letter from her employer confirming a raise that would cover the balance within 30 days. Garrett started to present the evidence. He got 3 sentences in. "Counselor," Whitfield interrupted, "I've read the filing. She owes the money. What else is there?" "Your Honor, my client has documentation showing—" "I said I've read it." Whitfield leaned back in his chair. "Miss Holloway, do you have $200 right now?" Denise's voice was barely above a whisper. "No, sir, but I can—" "Then we're done here." He picked up his stamp. "Eviction granted. 30 days to vacate." Garrett tried again. "Your Honor, there's a precedent for—" "Next case." The gavel came down. Denise Holloway stood frozen. Her eyes went glassy. Garrett touched her arm and whispered something. She sat down slowly, her hands still shaking, staring at the table like she was trying to remember how to breathe. Olivia watched all of it. She watched the judge dismiss a woman's home in less than 90 seconds. She watched a public defender who didn't even try to fight. She watched a courtroom full of people accept it like it was weather, something you endured because you couldn't change it. And something shifted inside her. She didn't plan to speak. She had come to observe, document, and file a report. That was the protocol. That was how the system worked. But the system had just thrown a mother and her children onto the street over $200 without letting her finish a sentence. Olivia stood up. Every head in the gallery turned. "Your Honor," she said. Her voice was calm, clear, and carried to every corner of the room. "I'm a member of the bar, and I'd like to note for the record that the defendant was not given adequate opportunity to present exculpatory evidence. Under Section 14-6 of the State Housing Code, a tenant who demonstrates ability to pay within a 45-day window is entitled to a continuance." The courtroom went silent. Whitfield looked up from his papers. His eyes found Olivia, a black woman in a plain blazer, standing in the 5th row of his courtroom, telling him he was wrong. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor. "And who exactly are you?" he said. "A court observer and a member of the state bar, Your Honor." "A court observer." He repeated it slowly, tasting the words like something sour. He looked her up and down. The plain blazer, the flat shoes, the natural hair. He made his assessment in 2 seconds. "Let me tell you something, sweetheart," he said, leaning forward. "I've been on this bench since before you could spell courtroom. I don't need some woman wandering in off the street to tell me how to run my court." "I'm not telling you how to run your court, Your Honor. I'm citing the law." "The law?" He almost laughed. "You want to talk about the law? The law says I decide what happens in this room. The law says I can hold anyone in contempt who disrupts my proceedings. And right now, you're disrupting my proceedings. Due process is not a disruption, Your Honor." The room held its breath. Whitfield's smile disappeared. The gold ring tapped twice against the bench. His voice dropped low, the voice of a man who had never, in 30 years, been told he was wrong by someone who looked like her. "Last chance," he said. "Sit down, or I'll have you removed." Olivia didn't sit down. She stood exactly where she was, her hands at her sides, her eyes level with his. "I respectfully decline, Your Honor. The record should reflect—" "Bailiff!" The word cut through the air. "Remove this woman from my courtroom. Charge her with contempt and book her for the night. He leaned into the microphone. Maybe a few hours in a holding cell will remind her that in this courthouse, I am the law. The bailiff hesitated. He looked at Olivia. He looked at the judge. Then he walked toward her with handcuffs. Denise Holloway covered her mouth with both hands. Olivia didn't resist. She turned around, placed her wrists behind her back, and let the bailiff cuff her. As she was led past the gallery, she looked straight ahead. Not at the judge, not at the crowd. She looked at Denise Holloway and gave her the smallest nod. The message was clear. This isn't over. Are you serious right now? Imagine standing in a courtroom, citing actual law, and getting handcuffed for it. Not because you're wrong, because of how you look. 30 people watched. Nobody moved. That silence, that's the part that keeps me up at night. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like floor wax and silence. The bailiff, a stocky man in his 40s named Harding, walked Olivia down a narrow corridor toward the processing room. His hand was on her elbow. Light grip, almost apologetic. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, halfway down the hall, he did. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about this," he said. Low voice, eyes forward. I do what the judge tells me." Olivia looked at him. "I know," she said. "That's the problem." Harding swallowed hard. He didn't say another word. Behind them, the courtroom doors swung shut. Through the thick wood, Olivia could still hear Whitfield's voice, muffled now, but carrying the same tone. He was already on the next case, already moving on, as if jailing a woman for citing the law was nothing more than a footnote in his mourning. The processing room was a small square space with a desk, a computer from the early 2000s, and a camera mounted on a tripod. A female deputy sat behind the desk. She looked up when they entered, saw the cuffs, and reached for a form without asking questions. "Name?" the deputy said. "Olivia Turner." "Charge?" Harding cleared his throat. "Contempt of court. Judge Whitfield's order." The deputy typed it in. She didn't ask for details. In Ridgemont, the judge's word was the only detail that mattered. They took her belongings. One navy blazer, one briefcase, brown leather, scuffed at the corners. One cell phone, one set of car keys, Honda, one pair of reading glasses, one wallet containing a driver's license, 2 credit cards, and a business card that the deputy didn't bother to read. She placed each item in a clear plastic bag, labeled it, and sealed it shut. If she had flipped that business card over, she would have seen 4 words printed in small, clean type. State Bar Association. Chair. But she didn't flip it. Nobody in Ridgemont expected to find a title like that on a black woman in handcuffs. They fingerprinted her. The ink was cold. Olivia pressed each finger against the card with the precision of someone who had handled evidence 1,000 times before. The deputy watched her. Most people fumbled through this part, their hands trembling, their fingers slipping. Olivia's hands were steady, practiced, like she was signing documents, not being booked. They photographed her, front, side. The camera flash was harsh and white. Olivia stood with her chin level, her expression neutral, her eyes looking directly into the lens. Not defiant, not defeated, just present. As if she were sitting for a portrait she had agreed to. She had seen this process from the other side 100 times, standing next to clients who trembled through it, who cried, who asked questions nobody answered. She had held their hands after, told them it would be okay, told them the system would work. Now she was the one being processed.
And she felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not anger. Something quieter. A kind of clarity that only comes when you see the machine from the inside of its mouth. The deputy led her to the holding area. It was down a flight of stairs, past a heavy metal door that required a key card. The air changed. Warmer. Thicker. The smell of sweat and cleaning fluid, and something underneath both. The stale, human smell of people who had been kept in a small space for too long. There were 3 cells. 2 were empty. The third held a man asleep on a bench with his arm over his eyes. They put Olivia in the first cell. The deputy removed the cuffs, stepped back, and closed the door. The lock clicked. "Dinner's at 6, the deputy said. "Lights out at 10. Then she was gone.
Olivia stood in the center of the cell for a moment. Concrete floor, metal bench with a thin mattress, a steel toilet with no seat, a single fluorescent light that buzzed with the persistence of something that would never die. She sat down on the bench. The mattress gave less than an inch. She was allowed 1 phone call. They brought her to a wall-mounted phone in the corridor. She dialed a number from memory. It rang twice.
Olivia? The voice on the other end belonged to Carolyn Webb, her deputy at the state bar. "Where are you? You missed the 4 o'clock briefing." "I'm in Ridgemont," Olivia said. Her voice was even. "I've been held in contempt by Judge Whitfield. I'm in custody overnight." Silence. "You're... what?" "Contempt of court. I spoke up during a hearing. He didn't like it." "Olivia, do you understand what... I'm calling the AG's office right now. I'm calling the governor. I'll have you out in..." "Carolyn." Olivia's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't do anything yet." "What do you mean, don't do anything? You're the chair of the state bar, sitting in a county jail." "I know exactly where I am, and I need you to let this play out." Another silence. Longer this time. "Olivia, what are you doing?" "My job." She hung up. The deputy walked her back to the cell. The door closed again. The lock clicked again. Olivia sat down on the bench. She leaned her head against the concrete wall and closed her eyes. In 30 years on the bench, Judge Harold Whitfield had silenced hundreds of people in his courtroom. He had held 17 people in contempt. He had jailed 9 of them overnight. Every single one had been black. Not one of them had the power to do anything about it. Until now. The cell was 7 feet by 10. Olivia knew because she measured it. Not with a tape, with her steps. 3 steps from the bench to the door, 4 steps from the wall to the toilet. She had a habit of measuring things. Courtrooms, offices, the distance between what the law promised and what people actually received. This was the smallest room she'd ever been locked inside. The fluorescent light above her head had no switch. It just stayed on, humming, flickering every 30 seconds or so, casting everything in a pale greenish glow that made the concrete walls look damp, even when they weren't. She lay on the bench. The mattress smelled like industrial detergent and other people's sweat. The pillow was a folded blanket that offered about as much comfort as a stack of newspapers. At 6 o'clock, a guard brought dinner. A plastic tray slid through a slot in the door. 2 slices of white bread, a scoop of something that might have been mashed potatoes, a cup of water. No fork, just a plastic spoon. Olivia ate all of it. Not because it was good, because her mother had taught her that you never turn down a meal when you don't know when the next one's coming. Ruth Turner. Olivia closed her eyes, and there she was. Not the old woman in the nursing home outside Birmingham. The young one. The one with strong arms and quick feet who could clean a 3-story office building in 4 hours and still come home to help with homework. Ruth cleaned the Jefferson County Courthouse every Tuesday and Thursday from 1974 to 1991.
Olivia was 8 the first time she went with her. Ruth couldn't find a babysitter that night, so she brought Olivia along, gave her a rag, and told her to wipe down the baseboards in the hallway. Olivia remembered the marble floors, the high ceilings, the portraits of white men lining the walls, judges, attorneys general, governors, all staring down with the same expression. Permanent authority. Unquestionable. She remembered following her mother into a judge's chambers, after hours, no one around, to empty the trash and vacuum the carpet. The room smelled like cigars and leather. There was a nameplate on the desk, gold letters. Olivia couldn't read it yet. She was only 8. But she remembered how heavy it looked, how permanent. Her mother moved quickly, emptied the trash, wiped the desk, vacuumed around the chair. She didn't touch the papers. She didn't sit in the chair. She moved through that room like she was invisible, like she was supposed to be invisible. On the way home, Olivia asked a question. "Mama, why do we clean their rooms, but they never say thank you?" Ruth didn't answer right away. She drove for a while, her hands steady on the wheel, the street lights sliding across her face. Then she said, "Baby, one day you're going to walk into a courthouse and they'll have to listen to you. Not because you're cleaning it, because you belong in it." Olivia was 8 years old. She didn't fully understand, but she remembered. She remembered it in law school, when a professor told her she'd been admitted to fill a quota. She remembered it in her first trial, when the judge asked her if she was the court reporter. She remembered it every time she walked into a room where nobody expected her to matter. And she remembered it now. Lying on a metal bench in a county holding cell, staring at a ceiling that hadn't been cleaned in years. "They're going to listen now, Mama," she whispered. The fluorescent light buzzed on. Somewhere outside the building, the night was moving. A courthouse clerk named Sandra Purcell was texting her sister about what she'd seen that afternoon. Her sister, who worked at the Ridgemont Gazette, was already on the phone with her editor. 60 miles south, a law school classmate of Olivia's saw a vague post on social media and started making calls. The story was spreading. Slowly at first, then faster. But inside the cell, Olivia didn't know any of that. She turned on her side. She pulled the thin blanket over her shoulder, and she slept, deeply, peacefully, the way only someone with a perfectly clear conscience can sleep. The storm was coming. She would be ready when it hit. At 5:47 a.m., Sheriff Dean Broderick's phone buzzed on his nightstand. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. Then it started ringing. 3 calls in a row from 3 different numbers. He picked it up on the 4th. "Sheriff?" The voice on the other end belonged to the county attorney. He sounded like a man who had just swallowed something sharp. "We have a situation at the courthouse." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that's going to be on the news in about 2 hours." Broderick was at the courthouse by 6:15. He came through the back door, still buttoning his shirt. His chief deputy met him in the hallway with a printout of Olivia's booking sheet and a look on his face that said everything. "Who is she?" Broderick asked, reading the sheet.
Contempt charge from Whitfield, Olivia Turner. So what? His deputy handed him a second sheet, a printout from the Alabama State Bar Association's website. Olivia Turner's official portrait. Same face, same natural hair, same steady eyes. Underneath, chair, Alabama State Bar Association. Broderick read it twice. "Oh no," he said.
"It gets worse," his deputy said. "The Ridgemont Gazette is running a story at 8. Birmingham News already has it. Someone posted on social media last night. It's been shared about 4,000 times. The Attorney General's office called twice before I got here. Broderick leaned against the wall. He closed his eyes. 32 years in law enforcement, and he had never felt a headache come on this fast. "Get her out," he said. "Now. Full release. Everything by the book." Already started the paperwork. "And call Whitfield. I tried. He's not picking up." Of course he wasn't. Harold Whitfield was probably sitting in his den with a cup of coffee, watching the morning news, completely unaware that the woman he'd thrown in a cell was about to end his world. At 6:45, Broderick walked down to the holding area. He stood outside Olivia's cell. She was already awake, sitting on the bench with her back straight, her hands folded, as if she'd been waiting for him. "Ms. Turner," he said. His voice was careful. "I want to apologize on behalf of—" "Sheriff," Olivia stood. Her voice was polite, but carried an edge that made him stop mid-sentence. "There's no need to apologize. You didn't put me here. Judge Whitfield did. What I need from you is my release processed correctly. Every form, every signature. I want the paper trail complete." Broderick nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. We're handling it right now." "Good. And I'll need a copy of the booking record, the contempt order, and the incident report before I leave this building." "I'll have it ready." Olivia looked at him, not with anger, not with forgiveness either, with the calm, surgical focus of someone who had already mapped out the next 12 moves while the other side was still figuring out the board. "One more thing, Sheriff. I'm walking out the front door. Not the back, not the side. The front." Broderick hesitated. He knew what was outside the front door. Cameras, reporters, a crowd that was growing by the minute. Someone had set up a hand-painted sign by the courthouse steps. "Justice is not a whites-only club." "Ma'am, I'd recommend—" "The front door, Sheriff." He nodded. Outside, the crowd had doubled since sunrise. A group from the local NAACP chapter had arrived. 2 law school professors drove up from Birmingham. Denise Holloway, the young mother from yesterday's hearing, stood near the steps, holding her daughter's hand, waiting. At 7:30, Judge Harold Whitfield pulled into the courthouse parking lot in his silver Cadillac. He noticed the news vans first. 2 of them. Then the people, a cluster of reporters with cameras and microphones gathered near the front steps. He frowned. In 30 years, the most exciting thing that had happened at Ridgemont Courthouse was a water main break. He walked past them without a word and entered through the side door. His clerk, a young man named Davis, was waiting in the hallway. His face was white. "Judge Whitfield, we need to talk." "About what? Why are there cameras outside my courthouse?" "It's about the woman you held in contempt yesterday." "What about her?" Whitfield hung his robe on the hook behind his office door. "She get the message?" "Judge," Davis swallowed, "her name is Olivia Turner." "I know her name. She was very eager to share it." "She's the head of the Alabama State Bar." Whitfield stopped. His hand was still on the hanger. His back was to Davis. For 3 seconds, the room was completely silent. "What did you say?" he asked. His voice was different now, quieter. "She's the chair of the State Bar Association, sir. The woman you jailed overnight is the highest-ranking attorney in the state." Whitfield turned around slowly. The color drained from his face in real time, starting at his forehead, moving down past his eyes, settling somewhere around his jaw, which had gone slack. That's not possible," he said. She was just some—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew what he was going to say. "She was just some black woman who wandered into my courtroom." And that was exactly the problem. At 8:02 a.m.,
the front door of the Ridgemont County Courthouse opened. Olivia Turner walked out into the morning sun. She was still wearing yesterday's blazer, wrinkled now, creased at the elbows, a small stain on the cuff where the booking ink hadn't fully washed off. Her hair was flat on one side from sleeping on a folded blanket. She carried her briefcase in her left hand and a manila envelope of documents in her right. She looked like a woman who had spent the night in a jail cell.
She looked like she didn't care. The cameras found her immediately. 3 news crews, 2 photographers, a dozen cell phones raised by the crowd. The click-whir of shutters sounded like applause. Olivia stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She looked out at the crowd, 50 people, maybe more, and let the silence settle before she spoke. "My name is Olivia Turner," she said. Her voice was clear and steady, amplified by the courthouse acoustics. "I am the chair of the Alabama State Bar Association. I have practiced law in this state for 25 years. She paused, let it land. "Yesterday afternoon, I came to this courthouse as a court observer. It is part of my responsibility as chair to visit courthouses across the state and assess the quality of justice being administered. During a hearing, I observed a defendant, a young mother facing eviction over a $200 dispute, being denied her right to present evidence. I stood and cited the relevant statute. For that, I was held in contempt of court by Judge Harold Whitfield. I was handcuffed, booked, fingerprinted, and held in a county jail cell overnight." Another pause. The crowd was motionless. "I want to be clear about something." Olivia's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Judge Whitfield didn't jail a state bar chair yesterday. He jailed a black woman. That's what he saw when he looked at me. Not my credentials, not my 25 years of practice, not my right to observe his courtroom. He saw a black woman who dared to speak, and he decided she needed to be taught a lesson." A murmur moved through the crowd like a wave. "I am announcing today that the State Bar Association is opening a formal investigation into Judge Harold Whitfield's judicial conduct. This investigation will examine his use of contempt charges, his sentencing patterns, and the 17 formal complaints that have been filed against him over the past decade, none of which, to my knowledge, have ever been properly reviewed." She looked directly into the nearest camera. "Every person who walks into a courtroom in this state, regardless of what they look like, how they dress, or where they come from, is entitled to due process. That is not a privilege. It is a right. And when a judge uses his power to punish people for exercising that right, he has no business sitting on the bench." She took one more breath. "I also want to acknowledge the case that started this. Denise Holloway. A young mother who came to this courthouse yesterday asking for the chance to keep her home. She was given 90 seconds. Her evidence was ignored. Her eviction was granted without review. As of this morning, I have personally referred her case for emergency appeal. No family should lose their home because a judge couldn't be bothered to listen." Olivia folded the documents under her arm. "That's all I have. Thank you." She didn't take questions. She walked down the steps, past the cameras, past the crowd, and toward the gravel parking lot where her Honda was still sitting where she'd left it the day before. Denise Holloway was standing by the steps. She had her 4-year-old daughter on her hip and tears running down her face. As Olivia passed, Denise reached out and caught her hand. "Thank you," Denise whispered. Nobody ever stood up for us before." Olivia squeezed her hand. She looked at the little girl, wide eyes,
braids with pink beads, staring at Olivia like she was trying to memorize her face. "What's her name?" Olivia asked. "Grace." Olivia smiled, the first real smile since she'd walked into this courthouse 20 hours ago. "Grace," she said softly. "That's a beautiful name." She let go of Denise's hand and walked to her car.
By noon, the clip of Olivia's statement had been viewed 2 million times. By evening, it had passed 10 million. Every major network ran it. CNN played the clip alongside Olivia's official Bar Association portrait. The split screen told the whole story without a single word of commentary. A legal analyst on MSNBC called it the most powerful 5 minutes in recent legal history. On Fox, even the skeptics struggled to defend Whitfield. The footage was too clean. The contempt was too obvious. Social media erupted. Hashtag Justice for Olivia trended #1 nationally. Hashtag Remove Whitfield was #3. A law student in Atlanta made a 30-second edit of Olivia's speech set to music. It hit 20 million views in 2 days. Meanwhile, in his den in Ridgemont, Harold Whitfield sat in his leather recliner and watched himself become a villain on national television. His phone had stopped ringing hours ago, not because people stopped calling, but because he'd unplugged it. His wife stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. His attorney, a man he'd known for 40 years, had left a single voicemail. "Harold, don't talk to anyone. I mean anyone." Former defendants from Whitfield's courtroom began coming forward, one by one, then in groups. A construction worker who'd been sentenced to 60 days for a first offense misdemeanor. A teenager tried as an adult for shoplifting a pair of sneakers. A grandmother held in contempt for crying during her grandson's sentencing. A veteran who'd been called boy in open court. All black, all from Ridgemont. Their stories were remarkably similar. The same dismissive tone, the same refusal to hear evidence, the same phrase repeated like a mantra across 3 decades. "This is my courtroom." Within 48 hours, the Alabama Attorney General's office announced it was joining the state bar's investigation. The governor issued a statement calling the incident deeply troubling and unacceptable. 3 civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs. The NAACP demanded a full audit of Ridgemont's sentencing records. Denise Holloway's eviction case was reviewed by a different judge and dismissed within a week. Her landlord dropped the claim entirely after a Birmingham law firm offered to represent Denise pro bono. And in the middle of it all, Olivia Turner went back to work. She didn't do interviews. She didn't write op-eds. She didn't post on social media. She drove to the next courthouse on her list, signed in as a court observer, sat in the back row, and watched because the work wasn't finished. It had barely begun. The formal judicial conduct hearing began on a Tuesday morning, 14 days after Olivia Turner spent the night in a Ridgemont County jail cell. The hearing room was in Montgomery, a long, wood-paneled chamber with high windows and a table shaped like a horseshoe. 7 members of the Judicial Inquiry Commission sat behind it. 2 former appellate judges, 3 practicing attorneys, a law professor, a retired state Supreme Court justice who served as chair. Harold Whitfield sat at a table on the other side, flanked by his attorney, a tall, silver-haired man named Prescott, who charged $600 an hour and had never lost a judicial defense case. Until today. The room was packed, every seat taken. Reporters lined the back wall. A sketch artist sat in the front row, already drawing. Outside the building, a crowd of 200 stood on the sidewalk. Some held signs, some held phones, live streaming. A group of Whitfield's former defendants stood together near the entrance, arms crossed, saying nothing.
They didn't need to. Their presence said everything.
Whitfield looked different, smaller. The red flush that had been his permanent complexion seemed to have faded into something gray. He wore a dark suit instead of his robe. Without the bench, without the gavel, without the elevated platform that had separated him from everyone else for 30 years, he was just a man in a chair. And he looked like he knew it. Prescott opened with the defense they'd rehearsed. He called Whitfield a dedicated public servant who had been provoked by an unidentified individual disrupting court proceedings. He argued that the contempt charge was within the judge's legal authority. He described Olivia's intervention as an unauthorized interruption that undermined courtroom decorum. He spoke for 22 minutes. It was polished, professional, and it landed like a feather on concrete. Then Olivia took the stand. She wore the same style she always wore: a plain blazer, flat shoes, no jewelry except a thin gold watch that had been her mother's. She carried a single folder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked the commission through the day, minute by minute. The arrival, the hearing, Denise Holloway's case dismissed in 90 seconds. The statute she'd cited, Whitfield's response, the contempt charge, the arrest, the booking, the cell. Then she opened the folder. "Over the past 2 weeks," she said, "my office has conducted a comprehensive review of Judge Whitfield's judicial record spanning the last 15 years. She laid the first document on the table. In that period, Judge Whitfield has presided over approximately 4,200 criminal cases. Of those, 61% involved black defendants, in a county where the black population is 23%. Second document. Black defendants in Judge Whitfield's courtroom received sentences that were, on average, 41% longer than white defendants convicted of identical offenses. Third document. Judge Whitfield used contempt of court charges 23 times in 15 years. Every single person charged was black. Every one. The room was silent. Not the polite silence of attention. The heavy silence of people realizing they were watching something historic. Fourth document. 17 formal complaints have been filed against Judge Whitfield since 2009. Complaints alleging racial bias, excessive sentencing, denial of due process, and verbal abuse of defendants. Not one of these complaints resulted in a hearing. Not one resulted in disciplinary action. Not one was even formally acknowledged. She closed the folder. Judge Whitfield did not make a mistake when he jailed me. He did exactly what he has been doing for 30 years. The only difference is that this time, the person he silenced had the ability to speak back. Prescott attempted a cross-examination. He asked whether Olivia had identified herself as chair of the state bar when she entered the courtroom. "No," she said. "I identified myself as a member of the bar and a court observer." So the judge had no way of knowing. "Knowing what?" Olivia said. Her voice was still calm, but something in it shifted, a weight that hadn't been there before. "That I mattered? That's exactly the point, counselor. Every person in that courtroom mattered. Denise Holloway mattered. The man who got 60 days for a first offense mattered. The grandmother who cried during her grandson's sentencing mattered. They all mattered. The only person in that room who didn't understand that was sitting behind the bench." Prescott had no follow-up. He sat down. The commission deliberated for less than 3 hours. The ruling was unanimous. Judge Harold Whitfield was permanently removed from the bench, effective immediately. His judicial pension was suspended pending further review. His law license was referred to the state bar for disciplinary proceedings. When the ruling was read, Whitfield sat motionless. His attorney whispered something in his ear. Whitfield didn't respond. He stared at the table in front of him. The same table, the same angle, the same view that thousands of defendants had stared at in his courtroom when they were waiting to hear their fate. For the first time in 30 years, he was on the other side. He left the hearing room through a side door. No statement, no press conference. A photographer caught him walking to his car, head down, shoulders hunched, his attorney holding an umbrella over him, even though it wasn't raining. The photo ran on the front page of every major newspaper in the state. The headline in the Birmingham News read, "The Judge Who Taught Himself a Lesson." Outside the hearing room, reporters asked Olivia for a comment. She gave them one sentence. "Today, the system worked. Tomorrow, we make sure it keeps working." Then she announced her next move. She would be drafting a bill, the Judicial Accountability Act. Mandatory bias training for every sitting judge. Anonymous complaint systems. Independent sentencing audits every 3 years. And a fast-track review process so that no complaint sits in a drawer for a decade while a judge keeps destroying lives. She didn't elaborate further. She walked to her car, set her briefcase on the passenger seat, and drove back to Birmingham. There was a courthouse in Selma she'd been meaning to visit. 6 months later, the Judicial Accountability Act passed the Alabama State Legislature. The vote was 31-4 in the Senate and 89-16 in the House. The governor signed it on a Friday afternoon in a ceremony that was broadcast live. Olivia Turner stood 3 feet behind him, hands folded, watching the pen move across the page. She didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled when it was over, quietly, as she walked back to her car. The act changed 3 things immediately. Every sitting judge in the state was now subject to mandatory bias review every 3 years. A new anonymous complaint portal went live, and in its first month, it received over 300 submissions from 31 counties. A fast-track disciplinary panel was created to review complaints within 90 days, not 90 months. 12 judges were flagged in the first review cycle. 4 resigned before their hearings began. Harold Whitfield was not among them. He had already been removed. His law license was permanently revoked 6 weeks after the hearing. The last anyone heard, he had moved to a small town in Florida. He did not practice law. He did not give interviews. He did not attend his own retirement dinner because no one organized one. In Ridgemont, things changed slowly, the way they always do in small towns. A new judge was appointed, a younger woman named Catherine Stokes, the first black judge in the county's history. She kept a framed copy of the Judicial Accountability Act on her office wall. Denise Holloway kept her apartment. She got the raise her employer had promised. Her daughter, Grace, started kindergarten in the fall. On the first day of school, Denise packed Grace's lunch in a brown bag and wrote a note inside. "You belong here." Olivia visited Denise once, 3 months after everything. They sat on Denise's porch while Grace drew with chalk on the sidewalk. "I keep thinking about that day," Denise said. "You standing up. Everyone else just sitting there." "I almost didn't stand," Olivia said. Denise looked at her. "Really? Really? I came to observe. That was the job. But then I watched him dismiss your case in 90 seconds, and I thought about my mother. She used to clean courthouses. She told me that one day people in courtrooms would have to listen to me." Olivia paused. "I think she meant people like you, too." They sat in silence for a while. Grace drew a sun with 7 rays,
and asked her mother to count them. Olivia drove home that evening on the same highway she'd taken to Ridgemont 6 months earlier. The sun was going down, the same fields, the same billboards, the same stretch of Alabama that had been arguing with itself about justice since before she was born. She pulled into her apartment complex. Same parking spot, same 10-year-old Honda. Her phone buzzed. A message from Carolyn Webb. New complaints from Perry County. 3 judges. Want me to schedule site visits? Olivia typed back 2 words. Book them. She locked her car, walked up the stairs, and went inside. Tomorrow, she'd visit another courthouse, another small town, another back row. Because Olivia Turner didn't do this work to be seen. She did it so that one day she wouldn't have to. Have you ever witnessed someone in power abuse it, and no one said a word? Drop it in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Man, imagine your mom spent her whole life cleaning courthouses on her knees, and now you're running the entire state bar. That's not revenge. That's not luck. That's a promise kept. If that doesn't hit you, I don't know what will.